Before we begin, I want you to take a slow breath with me. In hospice, there are moments when nothing is said, yet everything is understood. This is one of those moments. When people talk about the end of life, they often speak about fear or pain, but rarely about the quiet signs that arrive without words. One of those signs is a smell, soft, unfamiliar, and deeply human. It doesn't announce itself, it simply appears the way truth often does. I've learned that this scent isn't something to be afraid of. It's not dramatic, and it's not cruel. It's part of the body letting go, part of the long goodbye that happens gently, breath by breath. When it comes, the room feels different. Time slows, conversations grow quieter. Even the silence seems to sit closer, as if it's trying to help. In those moments, my role isn't to explain or fix anything. It's to stay, to notice, to honor what the body already knows. The smell of death is not a signal of loss alone. It's a reminder of presence, of how close love and endings can be, and how much tenderness still exists, even at the very edge. When people ask me about the smell of death, they usually whisper the question as if the answer itself might be too heavy to carry out loud. I understand that instinct. In hospice, we learn quickly that some truths don't arrive with noise. They arrive softly, almost politely. And if you're not paying attention, you might miss them. The smell of death is one of those truths. It doesn't rush in. It settles. It becomes part of the air in a way that's hard to describe unless you've been there, sitting quietly, doing nothing more than breathing alongside someone who is nearing the end. It isn't one single smell. That's something people often get wrong. They imagine something sharp or rotten or overwhelming. But in real life, it's subtler than that. It's a change, a shift. The room smells the same, and then it doesn't. The body, in its own quiet language, begins to speak differently. Organs slow down, circulation changes, cells don't renew the way they once did, and the body releases a scent that doesn't belong to the living in the same way anymore. It's not meant to alarm, it's not a warning, it's simply information. The first time I noticed it, I didn't know what it was. I remember standing near the bed, adjusting a blanket, feeling that something had changed even though nothing visible had. The monitors were quiet, the breathing was slow but steady, the family was still talking softly in the corner, but the room felt fuller somehow, heavier, like the air itself was holding something. It took years before I could put words to that moment, and even now, words feel incomplete. What stays with me most isn't the smell itself, but what happens around it. Voices lower without being asked. People sit down, hands reach out and stay there longer. The room becomes a place of waiting, not in a restless way, but in a reverent one. The body knows what it's doing, and on some level, everyone else seems to sense it too. The smell doesn't create fear. It creates stillness. In hospice, we don't rush to open windows or spray perfumes when this happens. Not because we don't notice, but because we respect what's unfolding. Masking the smell doesn't change the truth of the moment. It only distances us from it. And distance is the last thing someone needs at the end of life. What they need is presence. Steady, unflinching, gentle presence. I've sat with many people during this time. Some are conscious, their eyes half open, drifting in and out. Others are already deep in a place we can't follow. The smell arrives whether they are awake or not. It doesn't ask permission. And strangely, often brings clarity. Families who have been struggling to accept what's happening sometimes stop asking how much time is left. They stop negotiating. They start being there instead. They brush hair. They say names. They tell stories that don't need responses. There's a moment I often notice when the smell becomes more apparent. It's when the body stops trying so hard. Muscles relax. The jaw softens. The breathing pattern changes, not dramatically, but decisively. It's the body saying without words that it's tired now, that it's done carrying the weight of living. The smell is not decay in the way people imagine, it's transition. I wish more people knew that. I wish they knew that death doesn't always announce itself with chaos or pain. Sometimes it arrives like a deep exhale. Sometimes it smells like a door opening quietly in another room. When you understand that, the fear begins to loosen its grip. You stop fighting the moment and start honoring it. I've seen family members recoil the first time they notice the scent. That reaction is human. Our instincts are trained to associate unfamiliar smells with danger. But when I gently explain what's happening, when I tell them that this is a normal part of the body shutting down, something shifts. Their shoulders drop, their faces soften. They realize they're not witnessing something wrong. They're Sing something natural. The smell of death doesn't mean suffering. That's an important truth. Pain and discomfort are separate things, and in hospice, our focus is always on comfort. The smell doesn't tell us that someone is hurting. It tells us that their body is changing at a cellular level, doing exactly what bodies are designed to do when life is drawing to a close. That understanding brings relief to many families, even if they don't say it out loud. There's an intimacy to these moments that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced them. The room feels smaller, not physically, but emotionally. Everything unnecessary falls away. Phones are silenced. Conversations drift into memories rather than plans. The smell becomes part of the atmosphere, like candle smoke after a flame has gone out. You don't focus on it, you just know it's there. Sometimes the person dying seems more peaceful once this stage begins. Their restlessness eases, their breathing becomes more rhythmic, even if it's shallow. I've sat at bedsides where the smell was present, holding a hand that no longer squeezed back, and felt an overwhelming sense of calm. Not sadness, not relief, but calm. As if the body had finally aligned with something it had been moving toward all along. Families often ask me how long they have once the smell appears. I understand the need to measure time, to grasp onto something concrete. But death doesn't work on a schedule we can reliably predict. Sometimes it's hours, sometimes it's days. The smell isn't a countdown, it's a signpost. It tells us where we are, not how fast we're moving. I try to guide families away from the clock and back into the room. I tell them to say what they need to say, even if they think it's too late. Hearing is believed to be one of the last senses to go, but even beyond that, presence matters. The body feels touch. It recognizes familiar voices. The smell doesn't mean the person is gone. It means they are still here, just differently. There's a quiet respect I feel every time I encounter that scent. It reminds me that the body is honest. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't hide what it's doing. We're the ones who struggle to accept it. We're the ones who want to look away or fix or explain. The body simply follows its design, returning to the same natural processes that have always governed it. In some cultures, the smell of death is recognized and spoken about openly. In others, it's treated like a taboo, something shameful or frightening. In hospice, we try to strip away that fear. We talk about it plainly, gently, without euphemisms that confuse more than they comfort. Naming what's happening can be a form of care. I've noticed that once families understand the smell, they stop reacting to it. It fades into the background, replaced by what really matters. They focus on the rise and fall of the chest, on the warmth of the skin, on the simple miracle that someone they love is still here, even if only barely. The smell doesn't steal those moments. If anything, it deepens them. There are times when I'm alone in the room keeping watch while family members rest or step out for a moment. In those quiet hours, the smell feels almost sacred. The lights are low. The machines are silent. It's just me, the patient, and the slow passage of time. I find myself moving more slowly, speaking less, breathing more deliberate. Easily. The smell seems to demand that kind of respect. It reminds me that death is not an event, but a process, a gradual unwinding. The body lets go in layers, each one quieter than the last. The smell is part of that unwinding. It's not the end itself. It's the space just before it. I've cared for people who are alone at the end, without family present. In those cases, the smell feels even more significant, as if the body is asking for witness. I make sure to stay close, to talk softly, to explain what's happening even if I don't know whether they can hear me. No one should pass through that threshold unnoticed. Sometimes I tell them it's okay to rest. Sometimes I thank them for trusting me with this moment. The smell doesn't make those words feel strange. It makes them feel necessary. There are also moments when the smell arrives and death does not follow right away. The body lingers. Families grow confused. They wonder if something has gone wrong, but nothing has. The body moves at its own pace. It doesn't hurry just because we're uncomfortable with waiting. The smell teaches patience in a way few other things can. Over time, I've learned not to associate that scent with loss alone. I associate it with honesty, with the stripping away of pretense, with the moment when life stops demanding and starts allowing. It's a reminder that we are physical beings and that our bodies have wisdom separate from our minds. I don't romanticize it. I don't tell people it's beautiful. That would feel dishonest. But I do tell them it's meaningful, that it deserves acknowledgement rather than fear, that it's one of the ways the body communicates when words are no longer possible. When death finally comes, the smell changes again. It deepens. The room feels different in a more final way, but that first scent, the one that arrives while the person is still here. That one stays with me. It marks the threshold, the place where life and death overlap for a while, sharing the same air. And every time I encounter it, I'm reminded to slow down, to listen with more than my ears, to recognize that some of the most important moments in life don't look dramatic or sound profound. They simply feel true, sitting quietly in a room where time no longer behaves the way it used to, where breath becomes the only rhythm that matters, where the body continues its gentle work of letting go while everyone else learns how to stay without trying to change what cannot be changed, learning how to love without fixing, how to witness without interrupting, how to exist in a space where the air itself carries meaning and the silence feels full rather than empty, where the smell is not an ending but a signal that something ancient and deeply human is unfolding right in front of us, asking only for our attention, our patience, and our willingness to remain present as the moment stretches and softens and holds us there, breathing, waiting, listening, noticing the way the room seems to lean inward, the way even our thoughts become quieter, as if they too are learning how to slow down and make space for what is happening now. When the body begins to let go, fear often rushes in faster than understanding. I've seen it many times. The moment something changes, when breathing sounds different, or the room feels unfamiliar, people tense. They search my face for answers before they search their own hearts. And yet, in hospice, the most important thing we can offer in those moments isn't explanation or reassurance. It's presence. Quiet, steady, unafraid presence. The kind that doesn't try to fix what isn't broken, only changing. Presence doesn't come naturally to most of us. We're taught to act, to intervene, to do something useful. Sitting still can feel like failure, but at the end of life, stillness becomes the work. The body is already doing what it needs to do. Interfering too much can create distress where there doesn't need to be any. When fear shows up, it's usually not because something terrible is happening, but because something unfamiliar is happening. I've watched families struggle with this. They want to help to be needed. They adjust pillows again and again, offer sips of water that can no longer be swallowed, ask questions that don't require answers. All of it comes from love. But love sometimes needs guidance. I gently remind them that being there is enough, that holding a hand without squeezing, sitting without speaking, breathing together in the same room, those things matter more now than tasks. Fear has a way of filling silence if we let it. It tells stories that aren't true. It whispers that something is wrong, that suffering must be unbearable, that death is violent or cruel. But when you sit long enough, when you allow the silence to exist without trying to control it, those stories lose their power. What replaces them is observation. You begin to notice what's actually happening rather than what you're afraid might happen. The body, when supported properly, often becomes quieter near the end. Movements slow. The face softens. There's a sense of inward turning. This is not fear. This is focus. The body isn't panicking. It's concentrating. When we bring fear into the room, it disrupts that focus. When we bring calm, we support it. Presence means trusting the process. Even when it makes us uncomfortable, it means allowing ourselves to witness without demanding clarity. I've learned that people don't need constant talking at the end of life. They need a sense of safety. They need to know they're not alone. Words can help, but only when they're honest and gentle. Silence, used well, can be even more comforting. I remember sitting with a man whose family was terrified of the quiet. Every time the room went still, someone spoke. They told stories, asked questions, filled the air with sound. It was their way of keeping death at bay. Eventually, they grew tired. The talking slowed, the room settled, and in that stillness, something shifted. The man's breathing became easier. His restlessness faded. The fear in the room softened into something closer to acceptance. That moment taught me something important. Fear often belongs more to the living than to the dying. The body, when given permission, knows how to die. It's the rest of us who struggle to let it happen. We hold on too tightly, afraid that letting go means abandoning someone we love. And when it doesn't match what we need. Some people want quiet, some want music, some want a handheld, others want space. Fear pushes us to impose our needs onto the situation. Presence asks us to listen instead. I've noticed that when fear is high, people talk about death as if it's happening to the person, like an attack. When presence takes over, the language changes. Death becomes something the body is moving toward, not something being done to it. That shift in perspective can ease so much suffering. In hospice, we talk about comfort as more than physical relief. Emotional comfort matters just as much. Fear creates tension. Tension creates discomfort. Presence releases tension. It allows the body to rest. Even when the body is failing, rest is possible. I think about presence as a kind of permission. Permission for the body to do its work. Permission for emotions to exist without being fixed. Permission for the moment to be exactly what it is. Fear resists reality. Presence meets it. There are times when fear shows up suddenly without warning. A change in breathing, a pause that feels too long, a sound that hasn't been heard before. In those moments, it's easy to panic, but I've learned to pause myself first, to assess calmly, to model steadiness. Often, that steadiness is enough to keep the room from unraveling. People take cues from each other. When one person remains calm, others often follow. When everyone panics, the room fills with chaos. Presence is contagious, just like fear. Choosing it is an act of leadership, even for family members who feel unsure. I've watched loved ones sit silently for hours, simply holding space. Those hours often become some of the most meaningful of their lives. They don't always realize it at the time. Understanding comes later. But in the moment, presence creates a sense of connection that words can't touch. The fear of doing something wrong often keeps people from doing anything at all. I reassure them that there is no perfect way to be at the bedside. There is only honesty and care. Sitting, listening, staying. That's enough. As the body weakens, it becomes more sensitive to the emotional environment, harsh voices, frantic movement, unresolved conflict. All of it can create agitation. Calm voices, gentle touch, and quiet presence can bring surprising peace. This isn't about control. It's about respect. Presence also means allowing ourselves to feel grief as it arises without letting it overwhelm the room. Tears can coexist with calm. Sadness doesn't have to turn into panic. When emotions are allowed but not amplified, they move through naturally. I've learned that death doesn't need to be dramatic to be meaningful. In fact, the quieter it is, the more profound it often becomes. Fear thrives on drama. Presence thrives on simplicity. There's a moment near the end when words lose their usefulness. Explanations don't matter. Reassurances aren't needed. What remains is connection, a hand on an arm, a familiar voice, a shared breath. Presence becomes the language. I've been in rooms where nothing was said for long stretches of time, and yet everything that needed to be communicated was felt. Love doesn't always need sound. It needs attention. When fear is set aside, even briefly, people often discover they are capable of more than they thought. They can stay. They can witness. They can love through discomfort. That realization can be empowering in a time that feels otherwise helpless. Presence also honors the individuality of death. No two deaths are the same. Trying to predict or control the experience often increases anxiety. Allowing it to unfold while staying attentive creates space for a more authentic process. I remind families that they don't have to perform grief a certain way. There is no script. Presence allows for authenticity. Some people talk, some people cry, some people sit quietly. All of it is valid. Fear tends to rush ahead, imagining the moment of death long before it arrives. Presence stays here. It focuses on this breath, this moment, this connection. That focus can make the waiting more bearable. As time stretches, the room often settles into a rhythm, breathing, silence, occasional movement. Fear disrupts that rhythm. Presence supports it. The difference is palpable. I've seen people arrive at the bedside terrified and leave hours later changed, not because death became less sad, but because it became less frightening. They learned that they could survive being present with something so final, that knowledge stays with them. Presence doesn't erase loss, but it shapes how loss is experienced. It can turn trauma into memory, panic into meaning, fear into quiet sorrow. That transformation matters. At the very end, when the body finally releases its last breath, presence allows that moment to be gentle rather than chaotic. It allows the room to hold the weight of what has happened without collapsing under it. And long after, when people look back on those final hours, what they remember most clearly is not what they said or did, but how it felt to be there, how the room held them, how fear softened into something quieter, how staying became possible, how presence carried them through a moment they once believed they could never face, how simply remaining in that space taught them something about love, about courage, about the strength found in stillness, about the way fear loses its grip when met with patience and care, about how the most important thing they offered was not action, but attention, not solutions, but companionship, not resistance, but trust, as the body completed its work and the room bore witness in silence, breath by breath, moment by moment. As death draws closer, the world narrows in ways that are difficult to explain unless you've sat in that quiet space long enough. Time behaves differently there. Minutes stretch, hours blur, and the usual markers of a day lose their meaning. In that narrowing, what remains is not urgency but awareness. The smallest details begin to matter. A change in breathing, a shift in posture. The way the room feels heavier, as if the air itself has slowed down. This is where understanding begins, not through logic, but through observation. One of the most overlooked truths about the end of life is how much communication still happens without words. Even when speech is gone, even when eyes no longer open, the body continues to express itself through movement, through breath, through subtle changes that speak clearly if you know how to listen. Hospice teaches you how to listen differently, not with your ears alone, but with patience, with your whole presence. There's a point where effort disappears. You can feel it in the room. The body stops fighting gravity. Muscles that once held tension soften. The face becomes unfamiliar in a gentle way, as if it's returning to something older than personality. This isn't giving up. It's arriving. The body has reached a place where it no longer needs to prove anything. Families often mistake this quietness for absence. They worry their loved one has already gone somewhere unreachable, but that's rarely the case. The person is still there, just inward. Their attention has turned away from the external world and towards something internal, something we can't see but can sense by the calm that begins to settle around them. I've noticed that when this inward turning happens, the room responds. People naturally lower their voices. Movements become slower, more deliberate. Even those who don't understand what's happening feel compelled to tread gently. It's as if everyone present is being invited to match the pace of the body in the bed. There's a misconception that dying is always chaotic or painful. While discomfort can happen, especially without proper care, many deaths are marked by a surprising stillness. The body, supported and comforted, often finds its own rhythm. Breathing may be irregular, but it's purposeful. Pauses come and go. Each breath feels intentional, even when shallow. One of the hardest things for loved ones is learning to trust this process. We're conditioned to intervene when something looks different or unfamiliar. But at the end of life, difference doesn't always mean danger. Sometimes it simply means transition. Learning when to act and when to stay still is one of the quiet skills hospice care teaches. I've sat with people who seemed restless for days, unable to settle, shifting constantly despite comfort measures. Then suddenly, they would grow still, not tense, not rigid, but at ease. That stillness often marked a turning point. The body had found what it needed. The struggle had eased. In those moments, I encourage families to notice the change rather than fear it, to place a hand gently, to speak softly if they feel called to, or to sit in silence if words feel unnecessary. There is no right way to be present. There is only attentiveness. The senses change near the end of life. Hearing often remains longer than people expect. Touch becomes more significant. Even if a person cannot respond, familiar sensations can be grounding. A warm hand, a familiar voice, these things anchor the body as it moves toward rest. I've learned not to underestimate the power of simply being known in those final moments. Saying a name, sharing a memory, expressing gratitude or love without expecting acknowledgement. These offerings don't need to be received in a conventional way to matter. They exist in the space, and that's enough. The environment matters more than we realize. Harsh lighting, loud noises, abrupt movements can be unsettling. Soft light, gentle voices, and calm pacing create a sense of safety. The body responds to that safety, even when consciousness is fading. Comfort is not just physical, it's emotional and sensory. As death approaches, the line between sleeping and waking blurs, the body drifts in and out of awareness. This can be confusing for those watching, especially when brief moments of clarity appear unexpectedly. A sudden squeeze of the hand, a whispered word. These moments are gifts, but they are not promises. They don't mean recovery, they mean connection. It's important to allow those moments to be what they are, without attaching expectations. Holding on to them too tightly can make their passing more painful. Letting them exist, then letting them go, mirrors the larger process unfolding. I've noticed that unresolved tension in a room can affect the dying process. Arguments, unspoken resentments, emotional chaos can create agitation. When families find a way to bring peace into the space, even imperfectly, the body often responds. It's as if it's waiting for permission to rest. That permission doesn't have to be spoken directly, though sometimes it is. Simple phrases like, "It's okay to rest," "We're here," "You're not alone," can carry immense weight. Even if the person cannot consciously process the words, the tone and intention matter. There are times when people seem to hold on longer than expected. Families wonder why. They worry something is unfinished. Sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's simply the body's own timing. Death is not something we can schedule. It happens when the body is ready. Learning to sit with that uncertainty is one of the hardest parts. We want answers, we want timelines, but the end of life rarely offers either. What it offers instead is opportunity to be present, to express care, to witness something profound. I often think about how little we're taught about dying, considering it's something every living being will experience. We prepare for birth, for careers, for relationships, but not for death. Hospice becomes a classroom of sorts, teaching lessons that can't be learned anywhere else. One of those lessons is humility. No matter how much experience you have, each death is different. Each body tells its own story. Patterns exist, but certainty does not. Approaching each situation with respect rather than assumption is essential. Another lesson is patience. The end of life does not conform to our schedules or comfort levels. Waiting can be exhausting emotionally and physically, but waiting is not wasted time. It is active in its own quiet way. It allows for reflection, for connection, for adjustment. I've seen people discover depths of love they didn't know they were capable of during these hours. Sitting vigil strips awe, distractions. What remains is relationship. Even strained relationships can soften in the face of mortality. Not always, but often enough to be meaningful. There are moments when the room feels suspended, as if it's holding its breath. Everyone senses that the end is near, though no one can say exactly when. In those moments, the urge to do something can be overwhelming, but often the most respectful response is to remain still. I remind families that the body knows how to die in the same way it knows how to heal a wound or digest food. It follows an internal intelligence. Trusting that intelligence can be difficult, especially when emotions are high. But trust brings ease where resistance brings struggle. As circulation slows, hands and feet cool. Skin changes color. These physical signs can be alarming if you're not prepared for them. But they are not indicators of pain. They are signs of redistribution, of the body conserving energy for what matters most. Explaining these changes gently helps reduce fear. Knowledge doesn't remove grief, but it can remove panic. When panic is removed, there is more room for tenderness. I've noticed that many people worry about being alone at the moment of death. They fear stepping out of the room and missing it. I reassure them that death is not something that can be controlled by presence alone. Sometimes people pass when no one is there, not out of loneliness, but out of privacy. The body chooses its moment. That understanding can relieve some of the pressure families place on themselves. They can rest. They can step away briefly. They don't have to keep vigil perfectly to prove their love. Love is not measured by timing. It's assured by care, by intention, by showing up as best you can in an impossible situation. As the final moments approach, breathing often changes again. Long pauses, shallow breaths, sometimes a sound that can be startling if you're not prepared for it. I explain these things calmly, not to take away the weight of the moment, but to help people stay grounded in it. Grounding matters. Without it, fear can overtake everything else. With it, there is space to feel sadness without drowning in it. I've seen rooms filled with quiet grace at the moment of death, not because the loss wasn't painful, but because it was witnessed with care. Those moments stay with people. They become part of how they remember the person, part of how they carry the loss forward. Death does not erase relationship. It changes it. The way someone dies can influence how those left behind grieve. A calm, supported death often leads to a gentler grieving process. though grief is never easy. Hospice is not about making death easy. It's about making it honest, supported, and as peaceful as possible. It's about reducing unnecessary suffering and honoring the natural process of the body. When I think about all the deaths I've witnessed, what stands out most is not the moment life ended, but the hours before. The way people gathered, the way silence deepened, the way attention sharpened. Those hours are rich with meaning if we allow them to be. There is something profoundly human about sitting with someone as they die. It reminds us of our own vulnerability, our own mortality. It strips away illusions of control and invites us into humility and compassion. I often see people leave these experiences changed. They speak differently about what matters. They hold relationships closer. They understand that presence is not passive, but powerful. The end of life has a way of teaching lessons that no book or lecture ever could. Lessons about patience, about love, about the value of simply being there. As the room grows quieter and the body weaker, the world outside feels farther away. Emails, deadlines, worries lose their urgency. What remains is this moment, this breath, this connection. And in that narrowed world, there is a strange kind of clarity, an understanding that life, at its core, is not about accumulation or achievement, but about connection and presence, about being seen, held, and acknowledged as you move from one state of being to another, about allowing the body to complete its work without interruption, about honoring the silence rather than filling it, about trusting that even as words disappear, meaning remains carried in touch, in breath, in the shared stillness of a room where time is slowed, where the ordinary rules no longer apply, where attention becomes an offering and staying becomes an act of love, where nothing more needs to be done and nothing needs to be said as the process continues in its own quiet way.